half of Gen Z and a third of millennials identify as neurodivergent and disabled. They're using this language. They're coming into the workplace neurodivergent and disabled and mostly queer too, like a third at least queer.
Yeah.
And so those three often go together. And so then the question is, well, not necessarily what is your disability, what is your problem, what is your label, what is your diagnosis, where's your doctor note, but what are your access needs?
Hey, Nicole, what do you get when a former corporate CEO and a do-gooding executive walk into a recording studio?
Well, Aaron, nothing, because the two of us are usually on my couch or Zoom, because wine.
You get a podcast created for Gen X women who are bought into the corporate world, but fed up with the BS.
I know. It's how to thrive the 9 to 5 or 6 or 7.
It's career therapy. It's comedy. It's definitely full-on authenticity. Basically, we give you tangible strategies to rise in your career without compromising everything else.
Because work doesn't have to suck.
Hey guys, it's Erin here teeing up another interview. And I have to say that this might be an episode you think you can skip over, that you might not need. This buzzword of neurodivergence can feel elusive, overwhelming, maybe a topic that feels just noble, and you don't have time for noble. You only have time to grow and develop yourself. And I'm telling you, do not skip this, because I also think you're probably going to listen to it and send it to 3 or 4 people, and have your own aha moments about whether it's you or your friends or your family, your own nuances, your own potential neurodivergencies. This could be an awakening moment, I think, for a lot of people. So let me tell you about our guest, Pasha Marlowe. She's a therapist. She's been a therapist for, I think, 30 years. She's a speaker. She's a coach. Most importantly, she's an expert in the world of neurodiversity. She's also an author. She authored the book, Creating Cultures of Neuroinclusion. And here are some of the things that are inside our talk. First of all, I think this was probably the most powerful. Like, why we just need to get away from what she might call functioning labels, this ADHD, disabled, autism, bipolar, and especially the word disorder. And because it's complicated and it can call people out, and really instead what she talks about is focusing on the unique needs. And specifically unique needs, we'll talk about, these 3 categories: sensory, support, and access. And again, those sound really fluffy, but we're also going to talk about the practical things that you can do as a leader, as a teammate, as even a parent, to think about things that maybe you haven't thought about. For example, closed captioning that might be needed when you give a talk, and physical noises in the room, et cetera. We also hear Pasha's Buck That story about how she gives presentations. And I don't know, it certainly gave me permission and inspiration to continue to do me. And we hope that it does the same for you, whether that's, a big talk or a presentation just to your team. And then I also dig into, because it's kind of selfish, but for any parents listening, like, how do you talk to your child? Like, I definitely have one of my children that I would pretty firmly put in that category, undiagnosed, but some sort of neurodivergent to them. And she gives some great tips on, how you can talk through that. So I hope you'll listen in. And most importantly, I feel like this is an episode that might just really open some people up and hit you in the soul. So listen, share, let us know what you think. Enjoy my conversation with Pasha.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. When we talked a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned Nicole and I did an episode loosely sort of focused on neurodivergency with absolutely no qualification whatsoever to do it, other than, Nicole considers herself a little bit on the spectrum, and I'm just, a hot mess. So whatever you want to call it. But I want to start with you at the age of 50, who, I'm going to just be honest, you meet you and you would say cisgender, normal, mom of whatever, and you came out as neurodivergent and queer. And so just Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So for 50 years, I was masked. And I didn't even know I was masking for many of those years because we just kind of caught up in the norms and the expectations of life. So I was taught, as many young girls were, to go to school, hopefully get into college, hopefully get a job, hopefully get married, hopefully have children, hopefully then get a house and 2 doodle dogs and a minivan, and then your life will be complete. And so I was on this path, and almost as if I had a timeline that somebody else had given me, get married by 21, get my graduate degree by 23, have kids by 25. And like I did all that. I followed the rules, quote unquote rules, and I did all that and had the kids, 3 kids, and had the career. And then menopause. Well, actually, it was menopause on COVID.
Oh, geez.
Yes. And this is not uncommon, by the way, for a lot of midlife women around 2020 and perimenopausal or menopausal, realizing for the first time, allowing themselves to realize and put words to it, that they are neurodivergent and or queer. And the reason why those two work together, and they did for me, is once you start unraveling norms, such as neuronormativity, like this is what you're supposed to do if you're neurotypical. You're supposed to, you're supposed to be able to work 9 to 5. You're supposed to be able to focus on a task, one task at a time. You're supposed to be able to fill in the blank on all the things you're supposed to do in adulting and in a workplace. And I did some of those things poorly, but I did some of those things. I just took longer and it was harder. And I also was an entrepreneur on purpose. I've been a therapist for 32 years because I was not going to work in an office. I was never going to work in an office. And the 9 to 5 would not have worked for me. So I knew that, but I didn't know what that was about. So you start unraveling these norms. You're like, okay, well, if I've been kind of following the rules of society or thinking what the right or ideal or the good thing to do is follow this path of neuronormativity and these neurotypical expectations, and I've been kind of blindly following them. What else have I been following because somebody else made up these rules or because somebody else told me or because society said so? And I was like, that's interesting, because who told me I should get married? Who told me I was supposed to marry a man? Who told me I was supposed to be heterosexual? And the way we're conditioned to be neurotypical is also conditioning us to be heteronormative and cisnormative, for sure. That's how we're conditioned. That's how we're raised. And then some of us diverge earlier, and some of us in the younger generations are totally doing this, which is lovely. But for some of us, like me, who now I'm 54, it took a lot of bravery for me to finally say, I haven't been following my innateness. I've been following the script. I've been following the rules. I've been following the norms. But I don't think they're really me. And COVID was helpful because we were in our houses and not out in our jobs and not out networking and not needing to see our families who might have disapproved or our friends who might have disapproved or coworkers. It was like an insulated time of introspection and reflection that I think was very useful for me and for many. Also, the fact that during COVID, there were many blessings, not peopling as much, not socializing as much, not dealing with traffic and parking and noise as much and the sensory overload, and recognizing how I was starting to flourish in remote work and recognizing how disabling it had been for me to try to live in certain places or work in certain places or socialize in certain ways. And so, and this is again not uncommon, between the years of 2020 and 2022 was this very quick unraveling of unmasking and identifying neurodivergent and queer and disabled. And not even allowing myself to use those words and giving myself permission to use those words until I had done so much research. And for a lot of people, it's decades. For a lot of people, they stay up at night for decades going, I wonder if I'm queer. I wonder if I'm gay. Like for years and decades, they stay up at night wondering. And if you're wondering for years, you probably are. That's the truth, right?
Well, and you're a therapist, right? So that's what's going through my head is if it's that difficult for somebody to at least understands the value of introspection and asking the hard questions, then how about for others? As I'm listening to this, I'm wondering if part of the challenge when you say we're neurodiverse versus neurotypical, is neurotypical the broken thing? Or I don't want to use the word broken because then I don't want to say the parallel is that we're broken, but like, is neurotypical wrong? And is that part of the problem? Like,
yeah. So I do not think neurotypical is wrong. I do not think neurodivergent people are better. And nobody is neurodiverse. Like the entire human species is neurodiverse. So there's never going to be and never will be and never was one neurodiverse individual. So it's a neurodivergent or neurotypical person. The our entire species is neurodiverse. But I think most people are neurodivergent. The narrative right now in our society is that neurodivergent equals or is synonymous with ADHD or ADHD and autism or potentially ADHD, autism, dyslexia. Neurodivergent is anyone that diverges from neuronormativity. Depression, anxiety, trauma, stroke, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, bipolar. Like, okay, so most people, really, most people are neurodivergent. So what you read online, statistics show 15 to 20% of people are neurodivergent. That's just false. That's only looking through the lens of ADHD, autism typically. And so when people say, how can I accommodate my neurodivergent employees? Like, first of all, most of them are. And so we're using the word neurodivergent incorrectly. You might be saying, how can I accommodate my ADHD employees? How can I accommodate my sensory folks who need sensory accommodations? How can I accommodate employees with trauma, for example? But no organization, when I go to organizations and speak to managers or ERDs, like nobody's expecting leaders to understand every single neurotype. That it's impossible. And every single way to diverge. So rather than asking organizations and leaders to talk about or understand those, rather talk to people about their needs, talk to people about their sensory needs, their support needs, their access needs. And coming from that lens, rather than ever needing a diagnosis or disclosure, because diagnoses and disclosure intersect with privilege a lot. I can go into that, but that's the movement. The neurodiversity movement is moving away from the stigmatizing and the pathologizing and the labeling and the needing to disclose and needing to have a doctor's note and needing to have diagnoses, and more towards let's be neuroinclusive. Everybody has access needs. Everybody has sensory needs. Everybody has support needs. Some people will never identify as neurodivergent or neurotypical. Some people will never identify as disabled, and yet they might diverge, and yet they might be disabled, and they might have access needs or sensory needs, for example. And so from an inclusive design standpoint, designing workspaces, meetings, events, hiring practices with the lens of inclusive design, you're assuming there are needs because there are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so many questions. You mentioned you have a sort of a saying, solve for one, serve for many. So yeah, I want to get into mostly like what can we do about this, but actually I want to go back because I'm curious and our listeners might be curious. You mentioned you determined you're neurodivergent, queer, and disabled. And and that word disabled, to your point about labels, I feel like in the workplace, once we hear the word disabled, right, then people stop because there's this feeling of gravity and tangibility and maybe even risk and rules, right, that we don't have around neurodivergency and queerness. So can Can you talk about that? And then I don't want to go down there too far because to your point, I think part of where you're bringing us is like there's this umbrella that we need to solve for. But I have to ask.
Yes. Yeah. And there is a lot of stigma around the word disability and a lot of fear. Like legality and then like money and like fear come to people's minds. And also when I ask people today, what do you think of when you hear the word disability? Immediately, most people in the room say wheelchair, somebody with physical disabilities. And that might be true, but 80% of disability is non-apparent. So we're talking about things like ADHD or anxiety or stroke or long COVID. I mean, neurofatigue is a huge disability that's out there right now that's keeping people from being able to work 9 to 5. That's keeping people from being able to go into the office. They need more flexibility in remote work. They might need more mental health or for doctors' visits to help them manage their long COVID or late stage Lyme or neurofatigue, traumatic brain injury. There's just so many. And so disability is far broader in its scope than what we think. And the narrative in our society is physical disabilities typically. And so outside of 80% of disability being non-apparent, this is an amazing statistic, but half of Gen Z and a third of millennials identify as neurodivergent and disabled. They're using this language. They're coming into the workplace. I am half of Gen Z. I'm coming into the workplace, neurodivergent and disabled, and mostly queer too. Like a third at least queer.
Yeah.
And so those things often go together. And so then the question is, well, not necessarily what is your disability, what is your problem, what is your label, what is your diagnosis, where's your doctor note, but what are your access needs? And that might be that they need closed captions during a slide deck or a presentation, as well as being able to hear it. Like not necessarily because they can't hear, but because for their learning to take place and for them to stay engaged, they might need to see the words and hear the words. I find that more often than not when I'm presenting, I always present with closed captions, whether I ask people if they need them or not. And so many people come up to me after and say, I had no idea how much I needed those. And now that I've seen them, and it's, by the way, on PowerPoint automatic, you can just click captions and it comes up with a new double. It just happens. It's beautiful. And they say, I had no idea how helpful it was to read and listen. And then if there was a word I didn't understand, it helped me write it down so I can anyhow, just
especially, I hate to say it, in this world of Instagram and things like that, where people are doing that for videos, there's probably some wiring in the brain that it makes it even harder when they're in a real life situation. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And you're right. Younger generations are choosing to use closed captions, even when they're watching a movie. And I've asked them why. And sometimes it's because they can't hear, right? Sometimes it's because there's a noise next door and it's actually also ability to hear it more easily. And then sometimes they're just like, well, why wouldn't you? Like, why wouldn't you try to watch the movie from all different perspectives? Like you get more out of the movie. And like, that is so interesting that it's just becoming, and not just an accommodation, but like an additional benefit, that adds to the experience for some. So yeah, and certainly if there's a language barrier, that's super helpful. Or if they're multitasking, they're on the phone and they're watching a lot of times they're playing video games and they're on the phone and they're watching the movie, doing the whole thing.
Right. So they need all the things.
Hey guys, Erin here. Stop. Do not do it. Don't fast forward. I have something too important. I have a couple of very passive aggressive questions to ask you that you don't want to miss. Here they are. 1, do you find yourself often comparing yourself to others? Like, they work harder than me. They get noticed more than me. They have better luck than me. They're smarter than me. Or do you also just feel exhausted from having to always work as hard, if not harder, than everybody else to stand out and succeed? I know you have these challenges. We all do. And this is why I wrote the 50% rule. And I know you need to read another book like you need a hole in the head. But I'm telling you, this book and this rule, I'm obsessed with it. And it has changed my life. It has changed the lives of others around us. And it has also been the formula for success behind so many successful people. Savannah Bananas, Hamilton, Weird Al Yankovic. The 50% rule is the simplest shortcut to stop comparing, stop copying, stop chasing other people, and like literally compete in your league of your own. There isn't a day that doesn't go by where I stop myself and I'm like, oh, she did a talk that I wish I could do. She's got more. No, it doesn't matter, because we don't compete in the same league. I compete in a league of my own because I am constantly 50% ruling things. So if you're interested in this concept, which by the way is more fun as a team sport, but at least start with yourself. You cannot miss this book. It's not only powerful, it's really freaking fun to read. That is always my number one goal. It was my number one goal with my first book. It's my number one goal with the 50% rule. I want to make it enjoyable to read it. Why? So that you read it. So if you feel like you are stuck with these comparison cramps or just all the symptoms that I talk about in the book of sleep running syndrome, self-doubt gout, and pioneer paralysis, and well, you have to read the book to find out more, then just go buy the darn book. Easiest way, go to Amazon, search the 50% rule, and I cannot wait to hear how you 50% rule things.
Let's I want to get really specific though about this. Ask about, I love that, right? Like get away from the diagnosis and the specific, and everybody really has sensory support and access needs. What does that look and feel like though? Is that like, give us tangible, is that when you're a new hire? Is it, every week at a one-on-one? Is it before every meeting? Like maybe give us some very like super practical, tangible things that our leaders that are listening, and even if they're not, right, for their colleagues, can do without it feeling cumbersome, weird. Like what does that look like?
Right. It's not like every morning you have to say, okay, what are your access?
Right. Those words are a little, yeah.
Yeah. But what you're not doing is, what is your diagnosis, and make people disclose when they don't feel psychologically safe to do so. But for example, with hiring, interviewing, for example, giving people the questions ahead of time, writing down the questions, if it's in person, having them in writing in front of them, or if it's a virtual interview, putting them in the chat or even emailing prior. I hear more often than not, that's not fair. It's an accommodation that for some people it's going to allow them to understand the question, to process the question. There's different information processing speeds for sure. And you'll get more out of your candidate doing that. So that's one accommodation that a lot of people would very much prefer, but don't necessarily know how to ask for. But it definitely gives them the support and the access that they need to do well in an interview and to show their best selves. So there's that. In terms of onboarding, for me and for a lot of people, we're disabled by the incredible amount of technology that some people think is innate, but it is not for us, especially depending on how old we are. And to give an onboarding, 30 separate emails with different links and different paperwork that they need to fill out, for example, or
I can't do it. I can't do it.
It's just too much. I'm like, is there one place all this lives? Could there be one place? Simplifying, being really accurate, instead of saying, we need to meet today at 3:00, like whatever time it is, let's say it's 9:00 in the morning. My manager, supervisor says we need to meet today at 3:00. Between 9:00 and 3:00, I have gone down the path of, I've gotten into trouble. What have I done? What have I said? I'm getting fired. So adding just a little bit more accuracy and clarity and context really helps, because, and I'm using neurodivergent now as this wide umbrella of people who diverge. People who diverge from neuronormativity are used to feeling like they're not accepted, understood. They don't understand the rules as well. They don't even understand why those rules exist. And so we've already gone through a lot of judgment and criticisms and rejections. And so that's potentially where for some of us, our brain goes first. It kind of jumps there to we're going to be judged, we're going to be rejected. And so it's really helpful for managers, especially in recognition or in feedback, in evaluations, to know that for some of their employees that they might very quickly jump from a neutral email with one sentence that says, I'd really like you to work on. That employee could very easily take that one thing, spotlight, I really need you to work on, and assume that they're doing a terrible job and they're getting fired and they shouldn't even work there. And they might even leave before the meeting, like quit before the meeting because they fear the conflict of getting fired because of that rejection sensitivity.
Wow. Yeah.
That makes
It does. What about in meetings? One of the things that Nicole shared on our episode was just about some creative things she's done to be really inclusive of people and their thoughts.
I love the sticky notes. That was great.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Any other advice? I mean, that's obviously such a big thing that we do is we're constantly meeting.
Yeah.
What can we do differently there?
I think the sticky note idea was great for anyone who wasn't listening. It was just that opportunity for people to write down their thoughts, their impulsive thoughts, their in the moment thoughts. So there weren't a lot of interruptions in the meeting. So I thought that was brilliant. And certainly this isn't the extent of it, but having, a basket of quiet, like squeezy balls or strings or pipe cleaners. Like, I know it sounds like toys and it sounds like play, but it will absolutely allow somebody who's anxious, for example, to not like click their pen or do something that would be really distracting. It allows them to focus. It might allow them to bring their energy and anxiety potentially and stress to something so that there aren't as many potentially outbursts, for example. And so it's helpful. It's helpful for regulation. Sensory needs, I think, come up more than anything as the thing that causes people anxiety at work. So as simple as, like, if I'm in a room with somebody who's wearing heavy perfume or cologne, I can't concentrate. It's physically uncomfortable. And for a lot of people, it's also just mentally distracting to have a very strong smell. Or if there's, I know in a minute I'm going to have to talk about the fact that we can't accommodate everybody, but a lot of people are very sensitive to temperature. A lot of people are very sensitive to bright lights or loud noises. It's nice. It would be nice to have a different variety of chairs to sit in, not just for their size, but just their ability. There's a lot of people who really have a hard time sitting still with their feet like on the ground and sitting up like this. And if a chair is wide enough for them to cross one leg or even cross both, all of a sudden they're a different person being able to focus. There's a lot of people I work with who, if there's a fan or a heater or a motor going and that sound is just incredibly distracting. Kids in school, they work with like large HVAC systems, for example, and that they do terribly in school, not only because they can't hear, but they can't focus with the sound. And that happens in meetings too. So, of course, some people are going to need it quiet. Some people would prefer it loud. And some people like the temperature is 62 and some people like it at 75. And so it's a little bit tricky when you have a team of a lot of different needs. But I find that it goes a long way to create the psychologically safe space where it's okay to ask for a need, to claim a need and ask for an accommodation. Because somebody who's extremely uncomfortable or unfocused and really wants to do a good job, like people do well if they can. And if there's something that's preventing them from doing well and focusing and collaborating and innovating and problem solving, to allow them to have the space to do that, whether it's in writing or verbally. And I think if leaders acknowledge their different preferences and their access, support, and sensory needs, then it opens it up. Because I talk to a lot of CEOs, they're like, I have to just meet with you privately and not let anybody know I'm autistic. I'm thinking of coming out, but I shouldn't come out because they're going to assume I'm incompetent. And like all these narratives in their mind as to what would happen if they disclosed. Well, no doubt they have, people on their teams that won't and can't. Because it's not the culture of what I call the creating culture of neuroinclusion.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. I think, sort of playbook out of my authenticity playbook that like if all of this feels overwhelming, it feels like step one to unlock people is to be vulnerable about. And again, to your point, there is no label there. It could simply be, so I think about myself, and putting away the labels, right? Like I cannot follow project plans. Like you put anything in front of me that's linear and it's a should, I sort of freak out and I rebel against this. And my team knows this, right? Like when we were doing my book launch, it's like the last thing we can do is like 80 some, like if you tell me 3 things in bullets in an email, like Erin, don't forget to do da 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 da. I'm great. Or if I write it down myself, but like, so I think the number one thing is sharing that, and then but doing it in a way that's not all about you, that it's that you leave some empty space, whether it's then or in the future, to say like, like I told you, one of my biggest what would I call it? Sort of like I would just call it fault of mine,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't call it a neurodivergent, whatever. One of my fault, like what are some of the things that trip you up, sort of little weird little things that trip you up or something like that seems like the type of language that might, pull something out.
Yes, absolutely. Because there's a lot of folks who they call them user models or user manuals. Like, how should I lead you? What are you about? I don't love all of them.
Yeah.
The idea of it, I just don't really love the name. But asking neuro-inclusive questions, like you just said, it could be, how do you prefer to communicate? What is your preferred method of communication? Prefer to be recognized? I know people who to stand, and you and I do, to stand on stage and receive an award that just lights them up and fuels their work. There's another person who they would rather just stay home. They would rather you not recognize them publicly, like send them some flowers in the mail, the end. And it's really good to know, because you might be wanting to recognize them public because you figure it's going to, fuel them and light them up, but it actually terrorizes them or embarrasses them. So how do you prefer feedback? What type of work environment do you prefer? What are your sensory needs, or what are your signs of burnout? For a lot of people, the signs of burnout are people pleasing, and starting to say yes to things that they should say no to. Yeah. And how that leads down this path of becoming overwhelmed and burnout. And what are the signs? Is it, do you start to get tummy aches? Do you start to forget to eat? Do you start to come in late for work? And just starting to get to know people from that, individualized perspective and lived experience too. And I always say, like, we have to look at intersectionality, because certainly, one person's experience, let's say ADHD, is going to be far different from another person, depending on their race, their age, their gender, their sexuality, their culture, their disabilities, other disabilities that might be at play. And so it's just so important to make sure we're not also making assumptions about what one person with ADHD or autism or schizophrenia or bipolar or depression needs. Because it's different. It's different. So that there's a certain amount of work that I do around specifically not making assumptions, and then also asking the person, just like agency, like ask the person what they need. Don't assume. Don't assume how they identify. Don't assume they want people first language versus identity first language. Don't assume they in terms of autism spectrum disorder or anything that ends in disorder, such as bipolar disorder, and there's many. Just drop the D. Like, there's no need to talk about people in that way. Just saying autism, just saying bipolar in those two situations, examples goes a long way, because you're releasing the stigma,
the negativity.
Yeah. So just dropping the D from our language is one of my calls to action. And stop, not saying high and low functioning, because that's such a value judgment on, what society thinks is high or low functioning. And people are not high or low functioning, but organizations can be. Society can be high or low functioning, but not people.
As I'm listening to this, as you stated at the beginning, one's mind could go to Jesus, like, holy crap, like so much, the least common denominator, and is so large, and But at the same time, I think we've embraced for many years that people are different, right? We have strengths finders and Myers-Briggs and all of these tests. And we learned early, even in my MBA, that didn't teach me much about the real world. I remember a class where we learned about, people are motivated by different things. So I feel like I think we embrace uniqueness. And what I love about what you're saying is there's just there's an even bigger depth. There's a bigger accommodations. I love that you don't have to worry about the label. It's about the needs, because it is such a, it's such a spectrum and et cetera. So I think there's a lot of opportunity where people, I think, putting aside all of this, some people could be, if they're on the, don't like woke and it's too much and this new generation is, too fickle. The reality is this isn't any different than what we're taught before. But I think there is an expansion, a depth of accommodation. Like when you talk about things like closed captioning, getting the questions first, just some of the physical distractions that could be, that I would encourage our listeners to say, like, just add this on to probably, especially the leaders who have done probably a lot of work in this concept of, understanding the uniqueness. And now this is like 201, like take it a step further.
Yes. And I definitely have heard, let's say Gen X and older being like, look, we handled it all. We did the driving into work and the parking and the not needing all these accommodations. We handled it. And like, did they burn out? Like, did they have them?
How did it turn out?
Did they need to retire? Did they die? Like, I mean, like, we don't have to suffer so much. And fortunately, the younger generations are like, what is this situation? Like, they're really questioning it, bravely so. And so I do think we're adapting and changing. And I do think we need to, not because the younger generations are requiring it, but I think it's evolution and change and a transformation and culture. And especially now with the world being and the workplace becoming so much more diverse and will continue to become more diverse and more global and more digital. Like, the world is changing. We have to adapt with it. And part of it will be accommodating different needs, whether we're in person or online. There's even just honoring gender pronouns, like the fact that you put your pronouns after your name on the Zoom call that I can see and that's, you would be surprised at how still unusual that is. It allows me to feel comfortable if I felt the need to share my pronouns or I use she, they. If I would feel a little bit more comfortable exploring that conversation of why I chose she, they. Or it's just interesting because I know a lot of LGBTQIA folks, specifically trans folks, that pronouns is like step one. Are pronouns honored? Is there a gender neutral bathroom in the building? Like, if you're going to be neurodiversity affirming, by the way, you have to be also LGBTQIA and gender affirming. But the amount of accessibility conferences and inclusion conferences or inclusive, supposedly safe spaces where everyone belongs and everyone's family, and there's no pronouns on their name tags and there's no gender neutral, like, that's interesting. And when I ask the leaders of these groups who feel 100% that they're inclusive, everybody belongs, they believe this to their core, everyone's family, bring your authentic self. And I say, I'm curious as to why you don't use pronouns. And they say something along the lines of, we don't have to, because we've established a culture that is so inclusive where everyone knows they belong that we don't have to do all those things. And then you look around and it looks like a lot of very white, wealthy, heteros, people, right?
Yeah, I learned that years ago. I don't know if it was for, I have a good friend that's non-binary, trans. It was probably them or somebody that, and everybody listening. Look, the pronouns aren't for you if you're sort of cisgender and all, like if you're a she, her, like I am. It is not about me. It is about the permission that you give to the others so that they don't feel like, okay, the only people that have those pronouns are the people that have, non-typical pronouns. So, I mean, it's just those simple things. I want to get selfish for a second. Since you listened to the episode, and it's selfish for me, but it's selfish for all the parents listening. When I hear you talk, like I'm more and more convinced that my son is neurotypical. Like, I don't know what the diagnosis is, right? Like back to your, like, I don't know what box, I don't know if it's ADHD, but I have said since he was little that he thinks differently. He's an old soul, that he's wise beyond his years, but then now we're manifesting into the, like, you can't have that and always do your homework, always like school, and I'm really faced with, right, he has 4.5 more years of traditional school. What do I do to support him most? I've asked for them to do an analysis of ADHD. I've realized they haven't done it. Like, how do I support him both with the school and even with my husband, who, there's tension when, he's getting bad grades, and like, what are some suggestions you have for us parents?
Yes. Well, first of all, kids do well if they can. So not assuming that a kid is lazy or doesn't care if they're struggling in school. Also, unfortunately, in the public education sector, especially in our country, there's still this requirement that often is there for a medical, doctor to see something to get a diagnosis in order to get an accommodation or 504 or IEP. I think we're moving slightly away from that and starting to work towards those needs. Again, those access needs, support needs, and sensory needs without the need for getting the diagnosis, which could take years and thousands of dollars to get. And I also think it comes to, in terms of supporting your child and likely you, because for most, let's say with ADHD, it's like 50 to 80% chance that you're ADHD, if you're saying that your husband is neurotypical. How you talk about ADHD, the language you use for yourself and your kiddo goes a long way. Are you using disorder? Are you using problem? Are you using treat or cure or fix? Broken? Or also on the other side, just so you know, there's this toxic positivity language about like superpowers. You're not disabled. You don't have neurodiversity. You have superpowers. And you're like, and I every day lose my books and my keys and my glasses.
Those superpowers fly me right into the ground.
Yeah, like I do not feel superpowered. There are many times that a person who like has a spiky profile, have you heard that, where like there's sometimes in a spiky profile, let's say with ADHD, your child might be like excelling in art or music, or is intuitive or empathetic, right? Has all these multiple intelligences and ways that they thrive. And then maybe with math or writing, they struggle. And so there's potentially superpowers and disabilities going on at the same time, or just struggles and challenges and strengths going on at the same time, depending on the classroom, depending on the subject.
Well, I even believe that there are, like, where there are weaknesses, there are probably strengths that are either coming through or more likely being squashed. Like I truly believe when I see like somebody on the spectrum, it's always like, well, of course, like Nicole as an example. When she sort of found out she probably is, I was like, well, of course she is. She's so freaking smart that like something had to, I feel like sometimes
something has to give.
Something has to give, which is, you're probably like, Erin, shut up. That's terrible. But
I hear you saying like nobody can be good at everything.
But I think it's a positive message too, right? Like if you feel like, oh my gosh, I am neurodivergent and I had these issues, like you probably also do have a superpower, not to be like that you may or may not be hiding, squashing, etc.
Yeah, there's some strength. I tell people often, and this again, also hearing from clients for 32 years, easy things can be very hard and hard things can be very easy for a lot of people who identify, for example, ADHD, autism, and even trauma, right? So like going to doing a TED Talk, writing a book, like easy, fun, lights us up. We're going to do it. But, asking us to fold our laundry, take it out of the laundry machine and fold it and put it away, hard. Finishing all the dishes, hard.
And following a project plan. Like I look at like how can I not do a 10-point list, but I've written 2 books? Like, what the fuck? Right? But yeah.
It's a different part of our brain, but also you might, as an ADHDer, it sounds like, lean towards what's interesting to you, not necessarily what's important. You know, that list might be important.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So that's your motivation. It's a very different part of our brain that looks at a list and does the tasks versus like getting into the flow of writing, you know, and by the way, for ADHD, the hyperactivity for a lot of people, it's in their bodies. They can't stop moving and they're very fidgety. But for a lot of women and girls, it's in our minds, the hyperactivity in rumination.
Do you see more with boys and males that it's a physical, where women, we may have that same hyperactivity, but it's in our holy crap.
And not because of it's because of how we're conditioned. It's because of how we're socialized, right? Because yes, the boys might have been like, well, boys will be boys, you know, they're jumping off their table again, and the girls were like taught, conditioned, sit still, listen, be a good girl, and then we're like inside of our mind, not okay, but we look fine, you know? And so we go home after masking all day at school or at work, and then we are at home falling apart. So you could be the CEO of a Fortune 100 company and be extremely successful, and nobody would know you're neurodivergent or disabled or however you identify. And you go home and you can't talk, you can't do anything domestic, you don't want to interact with your family, you need to nap, you need to, you know, go into your room, put some headphones on and watch Netflix. And it's because we've been masking all day long and trying so hard to cover up the fact that we have challenges. And then we go home and we feel like our worst selves come home sometimes for our families and have kids at school. So back to your question, like allowing your son to know that the physical and emotional exhaustion of masking is real. You might share in that experience as well. And the fact that there are labels like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder that end in disorder, that does not mean that you have to identify as disordered. In fact, if you identify as neurodivergent, by definition, you're rejecting the label disorder because you're saying that there are differences. There are not disorders. There are differences and not deficiencies. And it's very unfortunate with the label ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that there's 2 pathologizing, stigmatizing words within that label. So the shift is too vast, which is varied attention stimulus trait. And varied attention stimulus trait, you know, is it perfect? No. Is it less pathologizing, less stigmatizing? Yes. Does it speak to the fact that, no, we don't completely lose focus. We sometimes hyper-focus. Sometimes we have a lot of attention, and sometimes,
which is absolutely him. Yeah.
Right? So it's
when he's doing, and it's the classic when he's working on something he cares about and that he has been motivated himself, not been told.
Exactly. And so, you know, is he lazy in the other classes? Does he not care about the other classes? No. Is he not interested in them? Probably not as much. But for all parents of kids, and 2 of my kids are now 27, 26, and I do have a 17-year-old too. But my 27-year-old, like your kiddo, you know, struggled in some classes and had trouble focusing, but really thrived and flourished in certain subjects. For him, it was science and math. And we said, okay, what do you love to do? Like, what would you do if for free? What would you do all day long? And for him, it was drawing cars. He would just draw cars all day long. It was what he wanted to do. And when he was little, it was Matchbox cars. When he got older, it was, you know, sketching cars. And then when he got older, it was drawing cars. We're like, okay, is there a job out there that would allow you to be in your complete energy and passion and joy and flow? And obviously in that case, it was, okay, designing cars. Okay. And by the way, I'll just fast forward 5-10 years. Like now he is a car designer for 4
I love it. I freaking love it.
And it's not like that's not possible for a lot of kids. If they love video games and they just would thrive at designing video games, like that's okay. There's a lot of parents like, like my kid's going to be in the basement playing video games all day. That's going to be their job. Maybe. And is that okay? Like, you know, parents have like, but I want my kid to be independent. I want them to be able to live on their own and, you know, care for themselves on their own and have a job that provides them the ability to do blank, blank, blank. That's great. And it might not be what your kiddo needs. Your kid might not be the kind of person who can live independently. I, at 54, highly competent in so many things, really shouldn't live by myself. Because I will tell you, my husband's in Africa right now for 3 weeks. I am not struggling with writing the books and doing the TED Talks and doing the podcasts and everything. I'm not struggling. I am struggling with like trash, dinner, groceries. I'm struggling with like returning the gifts on time so I don't pay for them, the ones that don't.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with that. And like, it's better for me to live with somebody. It is.
Yeah.
There would be more food in the fridge.
Hilarious.
Is that embarrassing? It sure was. Like, it sure was embarrassing for me to even consider that I might need to live with somebody. Like, does that make me codependent? Like, no, we're all interdependent. And for some people, it's better for them to not strive for this level of independence or success and expectations that just might not be aligned with their innateness in general or their strengths. Like, I'm a much happier person if I can do the things that I love.
Hey there, it's Erin. I'm just popping in real quick to ask you a question. Is there any chance you know someone who is looking for a keynote speaker for their upcoming event? Look, I know that many event organizers, they struggle to find a speaker who provides both tangible value and business knowledge, but that also lights their audience on fire. And I truly believe there aren't many speakers like me out there who are both former corporate executives and professionally trained speakers. And there's definitely none that roll in with an orange suitcase they unpack with their audience. Trust me on that. I would love nothing more than to bring my message of using authenticity as your strategic career and business advantage to people spinning in your universe, especially if you'd be there. I promise my talks always create an immediate buzz, but not just right after, but for months and years after the event is over. You can learn more about my message, style, and reviews, and share my speaking info by going to beauthenticinc.com/keynote-speaking. That's B, just the letter B, authenticinc.com/keynote-speaking. Or of course, we have it right in the show notes to make it easy for you too.
Oh my gosh. I think you're so speaking into my heart, and I think our listeners, I think it's such an important topic. I do want to ask you two final questions I ask everybody. The first is sort of diverging a tiny bit, maybe not. We always ask the buck that question. So is there a time, a story when you bucked the norm, did things differently? Sure there was. And good things happened as a result.
Gosh, Lisa. Yeah, I mean, I because you're a speaker as well, I'll say I have never given the same presentation twice. I've never presented, and I've been presenting for 5 years. I've never presented the same slide deck twice.
Wow, God bless you. I love a good redo.
I've never memorized any bit of my slide deck, and sometimes I don't even use slide decks. Like, there are times where I get there and I'm like, we need to have a conversation because the word hearing and the language is dangerous or harmful for your team, for example. And so many times against the better judgment and coaching
Against typical
of the neurotypical way, I'm very much leaning into my intuition, and I do as a therapist now. I can read a room. I can interact with people and have a dialogue that meets them where they're at. And sometimes the slide deck is not appropriate, and sometimes the conversation needs to be had. And I talk to other speakers who are like, that sounds terrifying. Like, are you not prepared? I'm like, I'm actually quite prepared. I'm quite prepared to be spontaneous.
right.
I'm quite prepared to have an actual conversation. And is it as polished? No. But when I put pressure on myself to do it in that way, to do the slide deck in that order with this script, I miss cues from the audience of what they do and or where they needed to go. So anyhow, I just
Love that.
I'm doing it.
I love that. It's funny. I was at boot camp, so we're both in the same program.
Yeah.
And you've done the boot camp before.
Yeah.
I know. And, day 1 and 2 of that, went into the like, Jesus Christ, like I'm not that polished. I don't have this. I don't have that. And then we got to masterclass, which was about performance. And the theme, they must have said authenticity 500 times. I joked, like, I wish I had my authenticity bingo card. Right. I am such a geek. I'm like, yeah, like, I think I spontaneously screamed at one point, and how important that was. And, it sort of erased all that doubt from the 2 days before in a matter of an hour. And I'm like, you're right. And I'm somewhere in between you and that. But, it is so important for people to hear, and not even if you're a speaker, if you're going into a boardroom to present or doing a town hall or a sales meeting, or like, it is so easy to think typical is and best in class is that memorize that 52-page PowerPoint. That best in class is knowing your shit. I mean, that's why you're prepared. And I am too. I know my shit like back of my hand.
Yep.
And allowing that space. And there's only so much space, right? Like, there's space to memorize, and there's a zero-sum game taking up some of that space to improvise and to read the room and to connect. And so I love that. And that's, again, a very selfish thing, but I think a thing our listeners need to hear for all the things they do, not just speaking on a stage.
Absolutely, because they might be, managing a team and have an expectation in their mind of this is what professional looks like, this is what successful looks like, this is how a professional person sits, dresses, acts, moves. Not necessarily so. Like, so what are the expectations and norms we're working with because somebody told us so, because some book said so? It's just, I like to expand and think non-linearly and think critically and neurodivergently, and just always question, like, why do we do it this way?
I mean, that's the epitome of what we talk about in the Buck That Story. So, like, why do we do it this way? I love it. Why is typical? So before I ask the last question, where can people connect with you and learn more?
I'm the only Pasha Marlowe in the world, which
Awesome.
is like
I'm the only Erin Hatzakostas. Only yours is a lot easier to spell, I think, than mine. But
yes,
Marlowe with an E at the end.
At the end. So my website is pashamarlowe.com. My email is pasha@pashamarlowe.com. I'm also on LinkedIn at Pasha Marlowe. That's where I mostly live on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram and TikTok at neuroqueercoach. My coaching clients love to live on TikTok, but my kind of more corporate and speaking clients love to live on LinkedIn. So I play in both worlds with Instagram in between. But yeah, I'm responsive to the extent that I think I respond to. I know I respond to every DM I've ever received and every email. But even the comments, like I really love interacting with people because I'm about creating this like paradigm shift and mindset shift, and it needs to happen like in the moment sometimes. So and given my autism, like I just love my work and that's all I do. I wake up working and then I go to bed having worked, and I feel like I played all day. I'm not stressing myself out. But if somebody were to look at me, they'd be like, they would call me a workaholic and tell me I never have fun.
Right.
But they don't realize how giddy I get talking about paradigm shifts.
Same. Yeah, I hear you, sister. All right, last question, easy one. Just what's one last tip to make work suck less?
Make work suck less. Oh my goodness. I would say, oh gosh, because I want to say conversation. If there's somebody who you've been not talking to or connecting to at work because you just don't know what to say, you don't know how to deal with their disability or their pronouns or their neurodivergence, and you've just been like kind of in a microaggression way, just ignoring them to avoid conflict. Like, I would just say, please lean into the fact that we are all humans having this human experience with we all have these preferences and needs. And I think you're missing out on just like the most fascinating, nuanced conversations that will bring you to a deeper level of connection. And whether it's virtually or in person, just going to lean into those connections with people that you might really not know how to interact with. I would say lean into that.
Such great advice. I love that so much. Well, Pasha, thank you. This was such a great conversation. I probably, although we'll see if you do, I'd probably even make my son listen to it himself. For those listening, I'm sure they got so much out of it. Share it. I think this is such an important conversation. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
Thank you, Erin. So glad to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, it's Erin with a teeny request. If you have ever gotten any value from this podcast and you'd like us to stick around, plus you want it to continue to grow so we can kind of swindle bigger and more knowledgeable guests to join us and to keep providing you with tangible and inspiring actions you can take to achieve the career and life you deserve, could you please just take 1 minute to leave us a rating and a review? Those reviews go a long way in attracting guests to the show, and candidly, they really make Nicole and I's day. And we see you. We really do. So when you have the time and inspiration, we'd love to see a rating and review from you. Thank you.